In 1903, a man named Camp Gillette faced a crisis that had nothing to do with the quality of his invention. He had already built the safety razor, a device with a thin, disposable steel blade that any ordinary man could use without risking a serious cut. The engineering was sound. The concept was tested and proven. But almost nobody was buying it. In its first full year of sales, the Gillette Safety Razor Company moved exactly 51 razors and 168 blades. Those numbers were not merely disappointing, they were existential. The factory was hemorrhaging cash with no sign of recovery. Investors were circling, demanding returns that did not exist and never had. And Gillette himself, a middle-aged former bottle cap salesman who had staked his entire savings and reputation on this single venture, was watching his life's work collapse in slow motion. But instead of redesigning his product or lowering his ambitions, Gillette did something that defied every accepted principle of 19th century commerce. He decided to sell the razor handle at a loss. In many cases, he gave it away entirely, bundled free with bank account openings, distributed through retail partnerships, handed out like promotional flyers on street corners. Then he charged a premium for the blades, those thin, fragile strips of steel that wore out after just a few shaves and had to be replaced over and over for the rest of a customer's shaving life. It was a move that violated the most fundamental instinct of business. You do not give away the thing you manufacture. But Gillette did exactly that. And in doing so, he did not merely save his failing company from bankruptcy. He invented a business model that would reshape entire industries, from printers to gaming consoles, from coffee machines to smartphones. This is the story of how one man's desperate pricing gamble became the hidden architecture of modern capitalism. To understand why Gillette's decision was so radical, you need to understand the world he was tearing apart. Before the disposable blade existed, shaving was not a casual act performed at home over a bathroom sink. It was a professional ritual with deep roots. Men visited barber shops, sometimes weekly, sometimes more often, and sat in a leather chair while a trained barber pressed a finely honed straight razor against their exposed throat. The straight razor itself was an expensive, permanent instrument forged from high-carbon steel, sharpened carefully on a leather strop, and maintained with the kind of obsessive precision usually reserved for surgical tools. Owning one was a serious commitment of both money and attention. Using one demanded genuine skill, steady hands, and unwavering concentration. A single moment of distraction could open a wound that required stitches. And the barbershop ecosystem that had grown around this ritual was a thriving economy in its own right. A dense, well-established network of specialized shops, supply chains, apprenticeships, and professional customs stretching back centuries across every major city in the Western world. Gillette looked at this entire arrangement and recognized something that nobody else in the industry had seen. He saw inconvenience disguised as tradition. He saw a captive market in which the real commercial value was not the tool itself, but the repeated act of using it. A straight razor lasted decades, sometimes an entire lifetime. A disposable blade would lasted a week at best. If Gillette could shift millions of men from owning a permanent tool to depending on a consumable supply, transforming the daily act of shaving from a one-time investment into a recurring expense, he would not merely sell a product. He would engineer a dependency that renewed itself every single morning. But turning that vision into reality was brutally difficult. The blades had to be cheap enough to feel genuinely disposable, yet precise enough to deliver a clean, comfortable shave every single time. The handle had to feel substantial and premium in the hand, something a man would trust against his skin, yet cost almost nothing to manufacture at factory scale. And the entire value proposition had to overcome a deeply entrenched cultural habit that men had followed without questioning for generations: the weekly barbershop visit. This is where Gillette's true genius revealed itself. He stopped thinking like an inventor obsessing over metallurgy and started thinking like a systems architect designing a closed commercial ecosystem. He realized that the razor handle was not his product. It was his distribution channel. Every single handle in circulation represented a permanently locked-in customer. A man who had no practical choice but to purchase Gillette blades, because those blades were precision-engineered to fit only Gillette handles. No adapter existed. No workaround was possible. No alternative blade would physically fit the device. This was proprietary lock-in, executed at industrial scale, decades before the technology sector would even give the concept a formal name. And Gillette paired this lock-in with a distribution strategy so aggressive and so creative that no competitor could hope to match it. He forged partnerships with banks, which offered free razors as welcome gifts to customers opening new accounts. He struck deals with major department stores, bundling his razors with completely unrelated consumer purchases. But his single most consequential move was a partnership with the United States military, a deal that would place Gillette blades directly into the hands of an entire generation of young American men. The military deal changed everything. During World War I, the American government distributed Gillette shaving kits to every enlisted soldier in the armed forces. Suddenly, millions of young American men, many of whom had never shaved themselves before, having always relied on barbershops or older family members with steady hands, were introduced to the Gillette system inside the most captive environment imaginable. A military barracks thousands of miles from home, with no barbershop anywhere in sight. They learned to shave with Gillette blades because those were the only blades available. And by the time they returned home after the war, the habit was permanent, woven into their morning routine as naturally as brushing their teeth. The numbers revealed the breathtaking scale of what happened next. By 1908, just 5 years after those catastrophic first-year sales of 51 razors, Gillette was moving over 13 million blades per year. By the end of World War I, the company had distributed more than 3.5 million complete razor sets to American troops overseas. An entire generation of men came home from Europe with a Gillette routine, permanently baked into their daily lives. And the competitive dynamics were devastating for any rival attempting to challenge Gillette's position. Competitors could not undercut Gillette on blade pricing because Gillette controlled the handle ecosystem and could subsidize blade costs through enormous manufacturing volume. They could not compete on handles either because Gillette was perfectly willing to give them away for free, a sacrifice no traditional manufacturer could afford to match without destroying its own balance sheet. The moat protecting Gillette's business was never built from superior steel or sharper cutting edges. The moat was the model itself. What Gillette had engineered, whether through calculated strategic brilliance or pure survival instinct, eventually earned a formal name in business theory. Economists and strategists began calling it the razor and blades model. The underlying principle sounds deceptively simple when you state it plainly. Sell the platform at cost or below cost, then capture recurring revenue from the proprietary consumables that only your platform can use. But the implications of this principle are enormous, because it fundamentally rewrites the traditional power dynamic between seller and buyer. In a conventional transaction, the seller attempts to maximize profit on every individual unit sold. The buyer pushes back. Price becomes a negotiation, a friction point, a battle where both sides are trying to extract the best possible deal. But in the razor and blades model, the seller essentially surrenders the opening transaction entirely. The handle is cheap, sometimes free. The entry barrier is so low that the buyer feels like they are getting an exceptional bargain. There is virtually no resistance at the moment of purchase, and then, quietly, the dependency takes root. The replacement blades are proprietary. The refills carry steep markups, and the switching cost, the financial and psychological friction of abandoning your current system to invest in a competitor's, keeps the vast majority of customers exactly where they are. Economists have a clinical term for this dynamic: They call it installed base exploitation. The larger the installed base of handles in circulation, the more captive the blade market becomes. Once that base reaches critical mass, the business becomes nearly self-sustaining. New customers enter because the price feels irresistible. They stay because leaving feels expensive and disruptive. This is not a pricing tactic. It is an architecture of economic control. If you are finding this breakdown valuable, take a second to subscribe to the channel. We go deep on the business empires and hidden strategies that shaped the modern economy. And there is a lot more coming. Hit subscribe so you do not miss what is next. The first major industry to adopt Gillette's playbook wholesale was printing. In the 1980s, Hewlett-Packard recognized that the financial structure of inkjet printers mirrored the economics of razors with almost uncanny precision. The printer was the handle, a piece of hardware requiring a steady stream of consumables to function. The ink cartridge was the blade, proprietary, single-use, and carrying profit margins that would make most industries blush. HP began selling printers at or below their actual manufacturing cost. A machine costing well over $100 to produce might retail for $40 or $50, sometimes even less during holiday promotions. The calculation was direct. Every printer sold locked a customer into buying HP ink for years, sometimes for over a decade. And the margins on those cartridges were staggering, an astonishing, regularly exceeding 60%. A single cartridge costing HP pennies to manufacture would sit on a retail shelf priced at $30 to $50. The strategy proved so effective that it became the industry standard within just a few years. Epson adopted it. Canon followed. Brother followed. By the early 2000s, virtually every major printer manufacturer on the planet was operating on the razor and blades model. Then Keurig demonstrated that the model could extend far beyond electronics into the daily rituals of ordinary life. The coffee machine maker applied identical commercial logic to a morning cup of coffee. The Keurig brewer was the handle, sold at an approachable price, sometimes bundled free with bulk pod orders. The K-cup was the blade, proprietary, single-use, and sold at a meaningful premium compared to traditional ground coffee. Keurig even attempted to enforce lock-in using DRM technology in its 2.0 brewers, designing machines to physically scan and reject any third-party pod. The consumer backlash was immediate and fierce, but the underlying model held firm. The most powerful application of the razor and blades model, however, did not come from consumer products or office equipment. It came from the technology sector, where it scaled to dimensions that Camp Gillette could never have imagined. When Sony launched the PlayStation 3 in 2006, it sold every single unit at a loss, exceeding $200. The console was the handle. Expensive, sophisticated hardware that Sony deliberately underpriced to build an installed base as quickly as possible. The games were the blades. Sony wagered that software sales, licensing fees from third-party developers, and revenue from online subscription services would recoup the hardware deficit over the console's projected lifecycle. And over time, that wager paid off handsomely. Microsoft ran the exact same calculation with the Xbox platform. Nintendo applied the model across several of its console generations. The entire gaming industry collectively institutionalized a foundational principle. Hardware is merely a delivery vehicle for recurring software revenue. Then Amazon pushed the concept even further with the Kindle. The e-reader was sold at cost, and during aggressive promotional periods, pushed below cost. The device itself was never designed to generate profit. The real revenue engine was everything the Kindle unlocked: e-book purchases, Kindle Unlimited subscriptions, Audible audiobook integration, and the progressive entrenchment of customers within the broader Amazon ecosystem. Every Kindle sold was not just a device changing hands. It was a permanently open portal to Amazon's digital storefront, sitting on a nightstand, converting idle moments into transactions, Apple deployed its own variation through the iPhone. The device generates massive hardware margins, but the App Store, iCloud storage, Apple Music, and the growing universe of subscription services now represent a substantial share of total revenue. The iPhone is not just a phone, it is a platform, and every app, every subscription, every cloud upgrade is a blade. But the razor and blades model is not invincible, and no company on earth learned this more painfully than the one that invented it. By the early 2000s, Gillette had pushed blade pricing to levels that bordered on the absurd. A pack of 4 Fusion Pro Glide cartridges could cost more than $25 at a pharmacy counter. The profit margins were extraordinary, but so was the quietly building consumer resentment. People joked, only half kidding, that razor blade refills were among the most frequently shoplifted items in America. Not because of criminal intent, but simply because of the price. Every purchase felt like a small indignity. Then in 2011, a startup called Dollar Shave Club launched with a single low-budget viral video and a devastatingly simple value proposition. Decent razor blades shipped to your door for $1 a month. The company did not attempt to out-innovate Gillette on blade metallurgy or lubrication strip chemistry or the number of cutting edges crammed onto a cartridge. It attacked the model itself. By offering perfectly adequate blades at a fraction of the incumbent price through a direct-to-consumer subscription, Dollar Shave Club ripped open a truth that had been hidden in plain sight for over a century. Consumers were not paying a premium for a superior shaving experience. They were paying for the privilege of being locked into a proprietary ecosystem. The market responded with speed that stunned the entire industry. Within 5 years, Dollar Shave Club had captured a significant and growing share of the American razor market. Unilever acquired it in 2016 for $1 billion. Harry's followed a nearly identical path. Gillette's domestic market share, once comfortably above 70%, began to erode. The model that Gillette invented was being weaponized against it. What the Gillette disruption revealed is a deeper structural truth about the razor and blades model. It works brilliantly, often for decades, but only until someone discovers how to decouple the blade from the handle. In technology, this decoupling typically happens through open ecosystems. Android challenged the iPhone's application lock-in by offering a platform that any hardware manufacturer could adopt freely. Third-party ink cartridge makers have waged a decades-long guerrilla campaign against HP's proprietary systems, reverse engineering security chips, and selling compatible refills at a fraction of the price. Compatible coffee pods have flooded the single-serve market, steadily chipping away at Keurig's once dominant position. The pattern repeats with remarkable consistency across every industry where the model has been deployed. A company constructs a closed ecosystem around cheap hardware and expensive proprietary consumables. It grows rapidly. It dominates its category. Then competitors find a way to supply the consumable without requiring the original platform, or they build an alternative platform that welcomes cheaper substitutes. The moat begins to crack. But here is the paradox that makes this model so fascinating. Even when it is disrupted, the razor and blades model almost never dies completely. It evolves. It adapts. It fights back with everything at its disposal. Gillette launched its own subscription service and slashed blade prices for the first time in years. HP developed firmware updates specifically designed to detect and block third-party cartridges. Keurig redesigned its pod specifications to make replication more difficult. These companies pour enormous resources into preserving the model because the recurring revenue stream is simply too valuable to surrender. The razor and blades model is not merely a strategy, it is an economic addiction. For the corporations deploying it every bit as much as for the customers trapped inside its elegant self-reinforcing logic. What ultimately makes the razor and blades model so enduring, so resistant to permanent disruption, is not its structural cleverness or its financial elegance. It is its alignment with something fundamental in human psychology: the overwhelming preference for low upfront cost, even when the total long-term expense is dramatically higher. Behavioral economists call this hyperbolic discounting, the tendency to value immediate savings disproportionately while systematically underweighting future costs. A printer for $50 feels like a bargain, even when lifetime ink expenses will surpass $2,000. A console for $300 feels accessible, even when the game library will cost several thousand more. A razor handle for $5 feels trivial, even when decades of blade refills will quietly accumulate into a small fortune. The model exploits this cognitive bias at industrial scale, and in the 21st century, it has evolved beyond physical products into the domain of pure software. SaaS companies, software as a service, operate on a sophisticated variation of the same principle. The onboarding is free or nearly free. The trial period eliminates the upfront barrier entirely. And once a user's data, workflows, and daily habits are deeply embedded in the platform, the switching cost makes cancellation feel genuinely threatening. Salesforce, Adobe Creative Cloud, Microsoft 365. These are blade businesses dressed in digital clothing. The subscription is the blade. The accumulated data dependency is the handle. Camp Gillette could never have imagined cloud computing or digital subscriptions, but the architecture he designed in 1903, cheap entry, ongoing dependency, proprietary lock-in, is the same architecture powering the most valuable companies on Earth today. One man's survival gamble became the operating system of modern capitalism. And if you look carefully, his fingerprints are on almost everything you buy. If this story changed how you see the products in your own life, you will want to understand how Nike turned a simple running shoe into a global empire built on brand psychology and ruthless competitive strategy. Check that one out next.